Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Have you ever noticed someone take a step that's a bit unsteady, shaky, or slightly off-kilter? Yet that single step somehow made everyone in the room stop and take notice? Today's story begins with a boy whose steps don't match the rhythm of others and a waitress who chose to follow his lead, even when the music wasn't quite there. What unfolded next transformed more than just a dance floor. If you believe leadership isn't about perfect footing, but about someone trusting you enough to follow, then smash that like button and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Stick with us until the end, because this dance doesn't need flawless timing. It just needs a heart in the right place. It was a Friday evening, and the gentle hum of a live jazz trio filled the air of the Haven Lounge, a serene, upscale restaurant tucked away in a quieter corner of the city where time seemed to move a little slower. On weekends, the soft melodies turned the dining area into a shared dreamscape where diners would occasionally rise from their seats to sway gently in each other's arms. It wasn't quite a dance floor, nor a stage, just a polished hardwood space between tables, made for subtle movements and quiet bravery. At table 5, a boy sat quietly, watching those bold enough to step out. His name was Elias Kane, 8 years old, shoulders slightly slumped, feet still and hesitant beneath the tablecloth. His legs didn't always obey him. Diagnosed with dystonia as a toddler, Elias's muscles would twist unexpectedly, his balance unsteady, his steps slow and often interrupted by small stumbles. Once, during a family trip to a children's museum, he tripped in a crowded room and fallen hard. The laughter that followed wasn't malicious, just instinctive, sharp, and unthinking, but it cut deep into him. Since a sent to this restaurant because the maitre d' was discreet and the booths were tucked away in corners. Elias hardly noticed his food. His gaze was fixed just beyond his plate, on a waitress with brown hair tied back in a neat bun, moving gracefully between tables with a silver tray and a quiet, practiced smile. She moved like music, balanced, subtle. Her name tag read Lila. Lila Harper had once danced under stage lights, her name bolded on programs for a downtown modern dance company. That was before an accident. A torn ligament during rehearsal ended her stage career. Since then, she'd learned to live without rhythm, waiting tables, keeping her body still while something inside her still pulsed to a beat only she could hear. As she approached table 5 with a lemonade refill, Elias's eyes dropped to her shoes, soft-soled, worn with a dancer's subtle flex. He didn't look up as he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you still dance?" Lila blinked, caught off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She crouched beside the table, meeting him at eye level, not looming over his question. "Only when someone dares to lead," she whispered, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Elias's small hands gripped the edge of his seat, knuckles whitening. He didn't think. He just moved, slowly, unsteadily, a tremor starting in his knees and rippling up his spine. Elias stood. It wasn't graceful. His body wavered like a sapling in a breeze, but he didn't fall. He turned to Lila and raised one arm, fingers outstretched, an invitation, not a demand, just a boy offering a lead he wasn't sure he could sustain. Lila looked at the small hand before her. Around them, the music swelled faintly, a gentle waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. She glanced at the other tables, the couples, the curious half-turned eyes, then set down her tray, wiped her hands on her apron, and placed her palm in his. Elias took a step. Lila didn't hesitate, at least not visibly. Her hand slid gently into his, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room exhaled. The clink of silverware softened, conversations hushed. No one announced a dance, no spotlight turned, but eyes began to shift. Elias stood rigid, his back straight not from poise, but from sheer will. His grip was light, almost uncertain, his feet shuffling hesitantly. Lila waited, offering no signal, no cue, just standing with him, letting his pulse set the pace. One step. It came from Elias's left foot, the toe dragging slightly as he moved forward. It wasn't smooth or steady. His knees bent at odd angles, his torso jerking to compensate, as if every part of him was relearning how to move. But he led. Lila stepped with him, matching his uneven rhythm without adjusting his pace or masking his offbeat steps. Her body, once trained to follow music with precision, now followed a boy with unsteady feet. Something in the room changed. A couple near the center paused their dance, the man lowering his hand from his partner's waist, watching over her shoulder. Another guest, mid-sip of wine, slowed, glass hovering. The pianist, fingers still gliding over the keys, let the tempo fade until the melody became soft, like a memory. Elias took another step, then stumbled, his foot scraping awkwardly to the side. He froze, shoulders rising toward his ears in embarrassment. A soft laugh came from somewhere to the left, quiet, restrained, but unmistakable. Lila didn't flinch. She gave Elias the faintest smile, not wide, not pitying, just enough to say, "I'm still here." She shifted her weight with his, absorbing the stumble without correcting it, letting Elias feel he was still in control, guiding their uneven waltz. More people noticed. A waiter paused mid-pour. An older couple near the bar turned their heads. The laughter lingered, awkward and faint, hovering at the scene's edge. Lila didn't turn around. She'd placed the entire room behind her, choosing instead to mirror Elias's faltering courage. To him, each step was monumental. To her, each was sacred. A few children at another table watched, wide-eyed. One whispered to her mother, pointing not at the oddness of Elias's gait, but at how Lila held his hand, like it was fragile and precious. Elias, still tense, managed 3 steps before looking up at Lila for the first time since starting. "Is it okay?" he asked, breath catching. Lila nodded once. "It's perfect." She wasn't lying to shield him. She meant it. There was something raw, almost sacred, in how he moved, not despite the challenge, but because of it. Every lurch, every off-balance pivot, was a statement. "I'm still here. I'm still trying. I'm still moving." To Lila, that was dance in its purest form. They made it 5 steps, maybe 6, it didn't matter. The steps weren't measured by distance or form. They existed for their own sake, each a small rebellion. Behind them, the laughter faded. The pianist played softer, almost hesitantly, as if unsure whether to accompany or simply observe. Guests leaned back in their seats, not dismissing the moment, but absorbing it, unsure how to respond. Lila and Elias kept moving. Victor Kane stepped back into the dining room, phone still in hand, its screen dark. He'd only stepped out for a few minutes to take a call about a zoning delay on a downtown property. He hadn't expected anything to change. He certainly hadn't expected to see his son, Elias, his 8-year-old whose feet so often betrayed him, standing in the open, moving on the restaurant floor. Beside him, impossibly calm, was the waitress, her hand lightly in Elias's, her eyes fixed only on him. She wasn't correcting him, wasn't guiding. She was letting him lead. Victor's breath caught. His instinct was to intervene, to step in, to pull Elias back to the booth, to shield him from laughter, stares, failure. His foot twitched forward, but he didn't move. His legs faltered, not from weakness but from something heavier, uncertainty. For the first time in years, Victor Kane, a man of plans and precise decisions, didn't know what to do. He couldn't process it. Elias took a slow, wobbly step. The restaurant grew eerily quiet. as if every patron had tuned their ears to the sound of that single shoe brushing the floor. The pianist's hands froze mid-measure. The room wasn't watching to mock. Victor realized. It was holding its breath. So was he. He looked at Lila. She didn't glance at him, didn't seek approval. She stayed with Elias, matching his hesitant rhythm, mirroring the subtle shake in his limbs. Her expression was calm, focused, like someone tuning into a quiet song only she could hear. Elias hesitated, his right foot hovering, unsure. He looked up at Lila. "Eyes searching." "Keep going," she whispered. "I'm still here." The words weren't loud, weren't meant for Victor, but he heard them, and they cracked open something long hardened in him. Elias's foot landed. No tremble, no jerk. For the first time Victor could recall, Elias moved his right foot without hesitation. It was a tiny step, nearly invisible to anyone not looking for it, but Victor was. It stopped his heart. His throat tightened, the urge to protect melting into something messier, pride, fear, guilt. He didn't know. He only knew his son wasn't following. He was leading, and Victor was the one standing still. No one clapped, no one gasped. There was no cue for that. The room stayed in reverent silence, caught in the stillness between notes. Victor lowered his phone, its faint glow irrelevant. Lila didn't look at him, and Elias didn't know he was watching. But Victor saw every movement, every sway. Every time Lila let herself be pulled slightly off-center to follow Elias's uneven beat. It wasn't choreography or performance, it was trust. Something clicked deep in Victor's chest, like a key turning in a lock he didn't know existed. He stayed at the room's edge, hands loose at his sides, unable to step forward, unwilling to step away. The ride home was quiet, not awkward, but heavy with something still unfolding, like the air after a bell rings, still humming with its echo. Victor kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. Elias sat in the passenger seat, legs swinging just above the floorboard, gaze fixed beyond the window. City lights blurred past, but neither spoke of the night. Not the restaurant, not the dance, not the way everyone had stopped to watch, especially not how Elias had moved on his own. At the driveway, the house sat cloaked in soft darkness, porch lights casting long shadows on the stone walkway, the living room's amber glow seeping through the blinds. Victor turned off the engine but didn't unbuckle. Elias didn't either. The boy broke the silence. "I don't think I need you to hold my hand so much anymore," he said softly, not looking at his father. Victor turned slightly, expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Elias hesitated, fingers tracing the car seat seam. "I mean, I can still fall, I know that. But I think I can lead too, if someone lets me." The words weren't defiant or bold, just quiet, careful, like a fragile gift. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd heard negotiations, arguments, confessions, but this was different. A shift, a declaration not of independence, but of identity. Elias wasn't asking permission, and that caught Victor off guard. "I've always held your hand to keep you safe," he said finally, voice low. "I know," Elias replied. "But sometimes when you hold too tight, it makes it harder to move." The truth landed heavily between them, not harsh, but honest. Victor stared ahead, recalling every fall Elias had taken, every scraped knee, every failed step, every time his son looked up from the floor, blinking back frustration, silently asking for help. Victor had always responded by lifting him, deciding what came next. It hadn't occurred to him that Elias might want to try without him. Until tonight, until Lila placed her trust not in Victor's protection, but in Elias's lead, and Elias had risen to it. Elias unbuckled his seat belt, the faint click pulling Victor from his thoughts. The boy opened the car door but paused, turning to his father. I'm not saying I don't need you, he said. I just don't always want to be the one being led. Victor looked at him, really looked, at the boy's round face, his thinning frame, the earnestness in his voice. For a moment, he saw not fragility, not the diagnosis, not fear, but a boy claiming space in a world that often told him to wait. Victor had no response, not because he disagreed, but because Elias's words weren't up for debate. They weren't seeking approval, they were truth laid bare. Victor gave a small nod, just enough for Elias to notice. The boy smiled faintly, slid out of the car, and closed the door. Victor sat alone in the driver's seat, the silence stretching around him. Tonight, his son had taken the lead, and he was still trying to catch up. The next morning, Victor returned to the Haven Lounge. It wasn't during regular hours. No clinking glasses, no murmured conversations, no soft piano weaving through the air. Just sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor where, less than a day ago, his son had led. He hadn't made an appointment, didn't know if she'd be there, but Lila was, standing near the bar, polishing glasses with a white towel, her movements smooth and methodical. She looked up as the door opened, her face neutral until recognition softened it. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice measured, not cold, not familiar, just even. Victor approached slowly, his pressed suit crisp, shoes polished, but his posture seemed off, not weakened, but searching. He skipped pleasantries. "You weren't afraid?" he asked. When he stood up in front of all those people, Lila paused, setting the glass down carefully. Afraid of what? That he'd fall. Victor said, that he'd be laughed at, that it would all go wrong. Lila tilted her head, studying him. "You mean, was I afraid of failure?" Victor didn't answer. The question felt heavier than it should. "No," Lila said at last. "I wasn't afraid he'd fall." She folded the towel slowly, placing it on the bar, her eyes meeting his, calm but steady. "I was afraid no one would follow him, that he'd stand there, offering to lead, and no one would be willing to be led." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sobering. Lila leaned her elbows on the bar, her voice softer. "People like Elias, they're used to being guided, told, pulled, corrected. Every step they take, someone's ready to step in. It's well-meaning, but sometimes it teaches them they can't move unless someone else decides how." She paused, then added, "Your son didn't just move. He invited someone to move with him." Victor swallowed, his throat dry. He'd spent years anticipating every risk, building every safety net. Every school, outing, social event was filtered through control. What could go wrong? How to prevent it? He'd called it protection, but now, hearing Lila, he heard restriction. "He could have gotten hurt," he said, his words sounding thinner than usual. Lila didn't flinch. "He could have," she agreed, "but he didn't. And even if he had, it would have been his fault, his choice, not a cage you built around him just in case." Her tone wasn't harsh, just factual, leaving no room for defense. Victor stood silent, staring at a spot on the bar. Finally, Lila added, "You looked like you wanted to stop him last night." "I did," he admitted quietly. "Why didn't you?" Victor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at you." Lila gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "He was leading," she said, and I said yes. The room stayed still, just the creak of wood as Victor pulled out a stool and sat. He didn't argue, didn't counter, didn't reframe the moment into something rational. For the first time in a long time, Victor Kane listened without trying to take control. The community dance studio was unassuming, a converted firehouse with chipped paint, old brick, and a wooden sign reading Free Step Studio. Inside, the air buzzed with gentle, imperfect human motion. Children with leg braces moved in wide arcs, some guided by therapists, others by parents, and some, astonishingly, by each other. Victor stood in the doorway, out of place in his tailored suit, watching as Lila knelt beside a boy with a walker, showing him how to shift his weight from heel to toe. Her voice was soft, encouraging, but not pitying. Instruction, not consolation. When the boy stumbled, she didn't rush to catch him. She let him wobble, regain balance, and finish on his own. Victor waited until the boy returned to his seat, then stepped forward. Lila saw him and wasn't surprised. "I figured I'd see you here," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. Victor nodded. "I didn't come to thank you," he said plainly. "I didn't expect you to." There was a pause. He looked past her to the floor, at the scuff marks left by tentative, hopeful feet, then back at her. "I don't need someone to teach my son how to dance," he said quietly. "He's already doing that." Lila raised an eyebrow, waiting. Victor took a breath. "I need someone to teach me how not to hold him back, how to stop dragging him along." The admission felt foreign, sitting unfamiliar on his tongue. He'd spent years as the guide, the guardian, the barrier between Elias and pain. He'd never considered Elias might need him to step aside. Lila said nothing for a moment, then nodded once. Firm, not patronizing. She extended her hand. "Then start by stepping where he steps," she said, "not where you think he should go." Victor looked at her hand, then slowly took it. Her grip was steady, not firm, not soft, just present. She walked him to the edge of the room, where the music had started again, slow, instrumental, not too rigid. A boy with a prosthetic leg guided his mother in a sidestep, their arms loosely joined. Another child twirled in uncoordinated circles, laughing. "You see them dancing?" Lila said, voice low. "They're not following the beat, they're following each other." Victor watched. "I thought I had to keep Elias upright," he murmured. "I thought that was the point of being a father." Lila turned to him. "Maybe being a father isn't about holding them up. Maybe it's about not pulling them off balance when they've found their own." He exhaled, long and slow. "Where do I start?" he asked. Lila pointed gently to the center of the room. "You start there, one step behind him. Then, softer, don't pull. Just follow." The spring festival filled a modest auditorium at the town's edge, a space usually for PTA meetings and recitals, now transformed with paper lanterns, hand-painted banners, and rows of folding chairs packed with families, teachers, and neighbors celebrating kids often overlooked. Backstage, nervous whispers mingled with the rustle of costumes, not for perfection, but for presence. Elias stood off to the side, in a simple white shirt and black pants, hair carefully combed by his father an hour earlier. No sequins, no routine, just him. He was last to perform, not for a grand finale, but because Lila had quietly asked the organizers to let him go last, not to close the show, but to open something new. The announcer, a kind woman with a clipboard and a warm smile, stepped to the microphone. "Our next performer," she said, "doesn't have a song, doesn't have a partner. He just has a direction, and sometimes that's enough." She stepped back. Elias walked out. No music played. No one clapped at first. They weren't sure if they should. Elias stood center stage, eyes fixed in the middle distance, knees slightly bent, arms relaxed. For a moment, it seemed he might turn back, but then he moved, a step forward, left foot first, a small shift of weight, his arms swinging gently to balance. Then another step, right foot, solid. It wasn't dancing in the traditional sense. No choreography, no rhythm, just deliberate, careful movement. His own. Slowly, something shifted. From the third row, a woman in her 40s, graying hair in a tight bun, stood. She said nothing, just stepped into the aisle and mirrored Elias's step. A man in a wheelchair moved a few feet, turning toward Elias. Then another parent, then a teenage girl. One by one, adults, parents, volunteers, teachers, rose and moved, not toward Elias but with him. Each step he took on stage seemed to pull someone to their feet. Elias didn't look up. He just kept stepping, forward, sideways, a slow turn that bent his knee too far, but didn't stop him. Backstage, Lila stood beside Victor, arms crossed, eyes shimmering. Victor leaned toward her, voice low. "What is he doing?" he asked, not skeptical but reverent. Lila didn't look away from the stage. "He's not dancing," she said. "He's leading." Victor looked at his son, now at the stage's edge, breath heavy but steady, arms slightly raised, palms open, not for applause, but to hold space. Below, nearly a third of the room was on their feet, moving, awkward steps, quiet nods, small gestures saying, "We're with you. We see you." No spotlight followed Elias, no crescendo swelled, yet the world seemed to shift a degree, not because a boy danced well, but because he moved and others followed. In life, we spend so much time guiding others, our children, our students, those we love, believing our strength, our direction, our experience keeps them safe. And maybe, for a time, it does. But there comes a quiet, unexpected moment when those we've held begin to move in ways we didn't foresee. They step without asking, reach out without permission. In that moment, we face a choice that defines not just our love, but our humility. Do we pull them back, or do we follow? This story reminds us that leadership doesn't always look confident or capable. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it stumbles, but it moves forward. Elias led, not because he was the strongest, but because he dared to step. Lila followed, not because she had to, but because she chose to trust his direction. As we grow, the world often tells us our role is to teach, to lead, to control. But perhaps the greatest wisdom lies in knowing when to let go and step into the quiet grace of being led. In the end, there's no shame in following those who walk slower, speak softer, or move differently. Sometimes, the most powerful act is to follow those we've spent our lives trying to lead. If you've ever dreamed of leading but thought you weren't strong enough, graceful enough, or steady enough, remember this. To follow someone is a gift, but to be followed by choice, by trust, that's a miracle. Like and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, and tell us, when was the last time you followed someone who wasn't perfect but was brave enough to lead?